So have you set a routine yet for your bar exam studies? If not, stick around for today's video tip. We're going to talk about exactly how you do just that. I'm Jackson Mummy, the owner and founder of Celebration Bar Review. And for the past 25 years, I've helped thousands of bar takers, people just like you, to make their next bar exam the last bar exam. If you want to know more about how we do that, check out the links on this page after this video. Well, we're continuing our series today of 10 ways that you can improve your bar exam scores to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. And today we're talking about tip number 4, which is to set a routine. Now, by setting a routine, what I really mean is that you have to have a schedule that you can be pretty comfortable with, but that's also predictable and it's structured in a way that you just sort of roll into it. And you do your studies, as well as the other things in your life, on a pretty much regular basis. Now, I need to be careful when I talk about setting routine, because I know that some people who take the bar are what we would think of as Uber schedulers, and I don't mean people that call cars a lot. I simply mean that what you love to do is to overschedule everything. And the person that wants to figure out everything they're going to do right down to the smallest detail tends to be the same kind of person that went to law school or practices law. And so there is a natural byproduct that comes here, and we want to be careful to not fall into a trap. We're not talking about that kind of detailed planning, at least not for long periods of time. What I am talking about, however, is a general plan of attack or plan of action that you can take from now until your bar exam. And I want you to be specific, and I'm going to show you what I've got in mind. As you sit down and look at the amount of time that you've got until your bar exam, you want to then look at the course that you're taking and first figure out in rough terms how many assignments or how many hours that you'll have to do in order to get ready for the course. You might recall that we've said that in our course it's 250 to 300 hours. So if you're not in our course, you may have to figure out that number of hours for yourself, or maybe you can ask your bar review provider. In any event, start with that figure. Now you sit down with your calendar and you start to think, how are you going to plan out your studies? What does that 300 hours work out to on a weekly basis? And how many days a week do you need to study? And how many hours a week do you need to study? And what is that going to look like? Now, of course, in a home study course like ours, one of the great flexibilities and advantages is that you can move things around as you need. If you're attending a big box bar review, well, you're pretty well locked into their schedule, and so it's hard to do much outside of that. But I'm really talking to the people that have more flexibility here. And for most of our students, at least, anywhere from 5 to 20 hours a week will be more than enough time to study for the bar. It just depends on when you begin. That's why we started with tip number 1, which was to start early. But let's say that you're trying to take 20 hours a week of study for the bar. So you do the math and you figure out, yeah, I need about 20 hours a week. That's the time I've allocated. And then ask yourself, can you do that number of hours of study along with your job, your family, and your other commitments in life? If the answer is yes, you're in good shape. Now the trick is where to put in those 20 hours. If you can't answer that question in the affirmative, then you're going to have to figure out something else, either a later bar exam date or cutting out commitments in other parts of your life. All right, but let's assume you've got those 20 hours and now you want to figure out where you're going to put them. Well, one of the dangers that can come up is people do, in fact, at this stage, start to overschedule. They'll say, well, I'm only available to study on Wednesday from 1:15 until 1:28 p.m. That's a little tough to pull off. You need to have blocks of time. And so I recommend that you set up a 55-minute study block, a 1-hour study block. And the better way to do this is with these study blocks, and if you're using an electronic calendar or planner, start figuring out what that study block is. And you might be able to put 1 or 2 or 3 of them back to back to back, but now you get set up and you say, I'm going to put 20 of these blocks into my schedule. So what I want to do is start working with those 20 blocks and figure out where they fit in the day. Now, for a lot of people, one of the things that I think can make a big difference is to have some physical exercise, a period of time when you do some at least out walking or swimming or biking. Maybe you're a gym rat and you like to go to the gym. And so one of the first things I like to do in scheduling is schedule in my time for those workouts. Put it in, block it off. I actually call it tiger time because I protect it ferociously. You can't get into my tiger time for anything else. So you set that off first. Then, in my particular schedule, I set off time for when I'm going to be working, talking to bar students. So, in your case, this might be your going to work time, your job time, the other commitments that you might have. It's obviously a priority, and that time goes into your schedule. Then we've got the time that's committed to family, to community, to other activities that might be going on, and I block those times into my schedule and into my calendar as well. Well, when you start to look at all of that, family time, social time, recreational time, now I can start to say to myself, well, after work and family and workout and all those other things, do I have 20 hours in my schedule? And that can be a challenge for a lot of people. So now what's going to happen for most folks is they'll have to do some carve-outs. There's going to have to be some opportunity to see where you could create free time. Now, you might have some unencumbered, unappropriated time, for example, at night after dinner. Great. Start putting in some blocks there, or maybe some weekend time and start putting some blocks in there. But you want to start carving out that time. If you can't get to your desired number of hours just by filling in free blocks of time, now you're going to have to start making choices. And this is where setting a routine becomes really important, because the more consistently you can make the time, the easier it'll be to keep those commitments. So I'd start looking at what else you've got going on. Maybe that time for your fantasy football league, or catching up on the Game of Thrones, maybe that is simply time you're going to have to take away and block it out with study time. Now, I also know, on a more serious note, that some of you have a very active prayer life or a meditation life, and you may have learned that you do better with prayer or meditation if it's done early in the morning, and so you set a regular routine time to do that kind of activity. Well, our experience has been that studies after prayer or meditation or workout tend to be the most productive. So what you might want to do is get up an hour earlier so that you've got time for those activities, and then put in an hour of study. Some of you also may have a regular date night with a loved one or a family member, or time set aside to play with the kids, whatever that might be. The point is, get all those things on your schedule, look at them, start moving them around, and figure out what's going to be workable for you. When you've got a routine, a regularly scheduled time for these events, it's much easier to keep that appointment with yourself. And that's the same idea here. So what we're saying in essence is to sit down with your calendar, set an appointment with yourself to do your study, set a routine time. Now, as I said, my experience has been that the best study time is right after a workout or after prayer or meditation. It's a tip that we've talked about in other places. It's one of the ways to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. So if you're someone who's following our approach and you're trying to work out, I would say 3 or 4 times a week, I would suggest that you set your workout time for whatever is best in your schedule, half an hour, whatever the time that's available. And then right after you shower and get presentable to the world, try to set up at least an hour or 2 of study time right after that. It will generally be the most productive study time you've got from a physical or biological standpoint. And again, if you're using prayer or meditation, I would also put that in the same category. So the idea here is that you've got this regular time. So let's say you're working out or in prayer and meditation Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7 to 8 a.m. Well, set up your study time from 8 to 10 a.m. on Monday and Wednesday so that there's this regular time that you've set aside and you know it's allocated to studying. Now, I recognize that some of you are probably thinking to yourselves, well, my schedule is just too erratic. I can't do what he's talking about. Okay, try it this way. If you're a commuter, how much time do you spend on the train or the bus or the subway or carpooling? If that's time you could spend listening to lectures or doing some reading or studying, make an appointment with yourself and block that off as an hour or half hour of study time. Make it so you're always doing that. It's your routine. Now, if you're someone that has to drive an automobile to work, you're in California, and you know you're going to be on the highway for a long period of time every day, then maybe what you want to do is listen to Bar Review lectures during that time. It's a great way to get some routine into your studying. Now, some of you are going to be saying, well, I've really got a very busy life, and the only time I know I'm going to be able to study would be the weekends. Can that work? And the answer is yes, generally it can. Set aside the time. Again, make it your early morning or maybe late afternoon or whatever time works in your schedule, but set it aside, block it off, make it what we call sacred time, which means it's your time set aside for studying. But when you've got sacred time with your family or sacred time for whatever else is going on, make sure you're doing those things as well. In other words, don't bleed over from one to the other and try to multitask. keep those times and keep them unless something dramatic happens. Now, one reason it helps to have this routine study time is it'll help get you in the habit of studying. One of the hardest things for people to do is to get started, to just actually get the first set of assignments under their belt. The more routine that you can make it, the easier it becomes. The more often you'll do it, the more repetitive it becomes. And I've seen that when students get into that routine, they do a better job in their studies because there's more consistency. So one of the things I'm watching for with my students are long gaps of silence when a student sort of falls off the radar and they'll disappear for several days or weeks or months or even several months. That's not a good sign, and it's something you want to make sure it doesn't happen to you. Don't get into a point of sporadic activity because typically what happens is when you come back to study, you spend so much time trying to remember what you did before that you lose the value of the time you're currently spending. My advice is it's better to do a little bit on a regular basis than it is to try and do large amounts sporadically or when the mood strikes you. I mean, let's get real. Very few people get up in the morning and they say, "Whoa, man, what a great day. I get to study for the bar exam." I mean, I wish they did, but they don't. So if you don't make this part of your schedule and part of your routine, it really is hard to get it done. We are procrastinators by nature, and so that's part of the value of the routine. Now, part of that routine could be for some of you to take your laptop and your books and go over to your local coffee shop and sit down every morning and have your cup of coffee and do some reading for half an hour, work on the lectures, or do some question practice. You see, as long as you're doing these things consistently, even if it's a little bit every day, it can mean a lot of improvement over time and a lot of gain. The problem is when you don't do anything for days and days, it will often become weeks and weeks, and then it'll span into months and months, and then you'll find yourself in a position where you're not ready to take the exam. So starting early and starting with a regular routine and an approach will make a huge difference. Now, in some of the earlier tips, I talked about getting support of friends and family and those around you. This is also a good way to get their support. Saying to them, "Hey, when could I commit to an hour on a regular basis for my studies that wouldn't interfere with what you're doing?" It's a great question to ask the people around you and find out what they tell you. I think the more that you can set up a schedule and work with people in your life, the better off you'll be. Now, I want to wrap up with this idea. If for some reason you set up this routine and it's not working, change it. Do not get locked into it. Don't be pressured by it. Remember, you're the one that set it up. Don't say, "Well, I'm behind because I missed that 1 hour session I was supposed to have last Saturday." Truthfully, there is no such thing, at least in home study, when it comes to being behind. So don't let that bother you. Just set a new routine, make it manageable, make it achievable, and then keep doing it. And the more you keep doing it, the more you keep working with that routine, the more you're going to find that you're gaining momentum and progress, and you're getting closer and closer to the goal, which of course is to pass your bar exam. Well, that's our tip for now. We'll be back with tip number 5, and I'll see you on that next lecture.